Kia ora tātou, welcome back to our council meeting. Just working through to number 5 on the agenda, and it is around an update on the water reform. And it's page 15 of our papers, and I'll get our CEO, Heather Shotter, to speak to that. Heather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be very brief and take the paper as read, only to provide a brief update. The legislation that is indicated here to be introduced pre-Christmas is now being pushed back. You will no doubt be aware of that from the media attention that it has received, and will be going into the House sometime early next year. There has also been a couple of changes to the work group on governance, working group members on governance in the iwi space. So John Bashira has been replaced, but with Huhana Langdon and Tukarangi Morgan. And I'm happy to receive any questions either to myself, or I see Sarah's down the other end there, so she can take some as well.
Thank you, Heather. Any questions of our officers on this? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Heather, for the brief summary. Just a couple. First, could you just summarize your input and ongoing role with the DIA steering group?
I am a member of the steering group representing Taitura. So the steering group is made up of both LG&Z representatives and Taitura representatives, which was formerly Solgan, and I'm a representative of from Taitura, so from chief executives. And at this stage, DIA have indicated that they still would like the steering group to continue its work.
Great, thank you. Second question and final, just to understand in terms of community consultation, obviously there are some expectations around that changed when the mandate came through, but I was interested in your paper, page 21, outlining the January to June plan for next year. It refers to the acronym NTU having consultation engagement with local authorities, and just wanted to understand or ask if you could give us any insight into what that consultation engagement is intended for and how it might work.
Not at this stage, I can't, sorry.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, any other questions? Sarah, you don't wish to comment at all?
That's fine, thank you.
Right. All right. Fairly important bit of work, but it's still very much in its infancy and still a lot to happen under this program. So, look, I'll look to move that we receive the report or the update on the government's water reform. Have seconded from the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Oh, sorry, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Just to briefly comment around this, I note that it is a process that has been in train for some time, and we've had the chance to ask some questions along the way and have some workshops, etc., which have been very useful. But just wanted to share a couple of views in terms of where we're at now, and particularly concerned that I hold that as things are evolving, it seems that we are seeing quite a diminishment of community voice in the process, and to me that is a concern. Having, as you know from the last item, a very real interest around community input and community voice. You'll also be aware that I do have actually concerns around how the new system is being set up. I don't think that it's the best solution, but the concerns that I really wanted to speak to today are more around the process, and particularly having the quite swift switch from an optional to a mandated approach. Well, we as a council were on a track in good faith that we were going to collect information and then engage with the community to get feedback, and having that sort of quite snatched away from us is kind of, to my view, penalized us as a council and penalized the community in some ways in terms of being able to stick with the process that they had understood was on offer to them. Some people around the table will probably want to blame the government for that. Other people might want to blame the rowdy councils that got out there and sort of forced the minister to make a call there. But I'm not so much in the blame game. I'm more just in the game of making sure that we do acknowledge that we're in a situation where the community input, there were expectations around it, and those were removed since we last met and discussed this at council. And I do think that that's to some extent heightened community concerns about what's happened and where this is going. Concerns about their ability to really shape things in the long term, given that there's been quite a marked change in the engagement plans so far. So I will say in closing that I'm quite heartened actually to read of the now slowing and to some extent enrichment or re-enrichment perhaps of the process that's underway. And I really do hope that that leads us to getting better solutions in the long term around this, because yes, it is an absolutely vital part of what makes communities and cities work well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wanting to also express the disappointment on behalf of ratepayers. The words that Councillor Barrett used around the government's initial proposal that it'll be optional to opt in, then making it mandate without actually getting community viewpoint formally, and certainly getting a position from the city agreed. I think it shortcutted the process and it shortchanged our community and the expectations that the community feel that our assets are being grabbed to the central government. I think there's a concern in the community around the ongoing cost and decisions to influence the investment in the future. And this is my first real opportunity to express that disappointment on our city's behalf. I think it was a very poor state of affairs on the rushed consultation that they had to that point. And it was only natural that local government and voices of those local authorities were starting to come through with those concerns, and then to back out and just say mandate and make it happen. I think it's overall nationally, I think a very poor outcome. Thank you.
Councillors, look, I'll just make the comments that the government does seem to have listened somewhat in forming a working group, which includes 9 mayors and a mixture of metropolitan, including our largest city, right down to some of our smaller, more rural TAs, and a spread from north to south. So that working group's made up of not only local government voices, but also iwi Māori voices, and also Brian Hanna, who was the original steering group chair. So they are looking at all sorts of things, and where the local voice fits in, what the entity will actually finally look like, possibly other options of entity makeups. So they're doing a bit of work which will probably go right through the Christmas New Year period, and be reporting back to not only the government but also ourselves as local government as a partner in the reform. So I do think that there has been a slight stop, and are we checking on this? Is it right? But there certainly is, where you can see the timeline, that there is still quite a train of work to still happen. So look, I'm quite happy to receive this report. Thank you, Heather and other officers, for that. And if there are no further comments, we will vote. It's passed, 16 votes for, none against. Right, we move now on to our number 6, which is the CEDA shareholding review. It's a memo again from officers. David Murphy, our Chief Planning Officer, page 87.
Morena koutou. I'll take the memo as read. There's just a couple of points I'd like to emphasise. The first is that the shareholding arrangement with CEDA is really about a partnership and a partnership, a 50-50 partnership, whereas funding is quite different to shareholding. So funding is about where the benefit lies. So the city's obviously bigger and has more benefactors, so contributes more to the funding of CEDA. And you'll see there's a recommendation 3 there that really emphasises or recognises that any review of the shareholding is actually best to occur alongside the potential growth of CEDA, depending on what happens with government reform. So there's a recommendation there that the Chief Executive be directed to monitor government reform and engage with councils in the southern Manawatu-Whanganui region. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. Open it up for any comments or questions or first of all, questions of David. There is none. Thank you, David. Right, we have the 3 resolutions there, one around accepting the report. 2 is around that there will be no further action regarding the current shareholding arrangements for CEDA. But as David alluded to, number 3 is probably the main one where we will look to initiate discussions with our partners at MDC and possibly other councils that may be interested in the southern part of our region regarding government reform may mean around economic development with our partners Tararua, Horowhenua and possibly even Rangitikei. So I'm quite happy to move those. Seconded by Councillor Hapeta, thank you. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will ask that we take number 2 separately. It was a good report to see and to work our way through. I guess for me, it seems that most of the rationale being provided is that the reason for things to be the way they are is because that's the way they always were. And in my view, I think that we would be better to take an approach where ownership, representation, and investment are proportional, and that we should be quite comfortable actually taking a leading role in CEDA.
All right, we'll do that. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the officer for putting the report together. I think in our last joint strategic meeting, we had a good discussion with Manawatu District about going forward. And I think it was around recommendation 3, which was how we operate going forward and how economic development goes going forward, which is widening that out and how we can look at those opportunities with the CEs, both CEs looking at those opportunities going forward. And I think that's how we should leave it, that and look at those opportunities with other regions, and even looking at Accelerate 25 and looking at that and how we can expand in that area. So I think given that, that's where we should be heading, and we should be expanding out to those areas and not limiting ourselves and seeing where that leads us. So I'm really happy with these 3 recommendations. I think going forward, this is what we should be looking at, and having a really healthy partnership with Manawatu District going forward, because that's what we really have got and that's where we should be going. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy taking this position. I think only now are we starting to realise some of the benefit of the concentrated focus on Manawatu being Palmerston North and the Manawatu District, rather than having a wider shareholding with the other local authorities that neighbour us to expand on that view. Our investment to date, we expected right from the establishment of CEDA a step change in the delivery of benefit and visual positioning for us as a destination for tourism, but also for economic investment and creating jobs for our local community. And as I mentioned, I think it's only now that we're starting to see some real evidence and some runs starting to build momentum. And last thing I think we want to do is distract the current focus that we're achieving today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add that I think number 3 is the real pinch point for us in being able to get some traction with our other colleagues around us. As Councillor Dennison and Councillor Harper have alluded to, we're making good progress with our neighbours, with Manawatu. We are starting to become a city of choice. We are starting to become a region of choice. And a lot of that is to do with not only what the city's doing and the district's doing, but also our joint agency. We do have opportunities with all the transportation links coming into the Hora Whenua, and I do think we should be reaching out to our colleagues south and also our colleagues west and east, because we are the economic driver for them in terms of employment, in terms of services, whether it be recreational, retail, whatever that may be. So we should be trying to link together as much as we can. So look, councillors, we have we'll do number 2 first, and then we'll come back to 1 and 3. If I could ask you to vote on number 2 only, please. Has passed 15 votes for and 1 against. And now we've got 1 and 3. That's 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we move through to number 7 on the order paper, which is the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Annual Accounts 2021. Memo on page 91 of our papers from our Governance Manager, Hannah. Hannah.
I'm happy to take this report as read, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any questions? There being none, look, I'll look to move the resolution around the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report Financial Statements 2020-21 as attached in the memo be received for information. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we will vote, please. It's passed 16 votes for and none against. Right, we now move through to appointment of elected member on the consent phase of the Wastewater BPO. Again, we have a memo on page 103 from our Governance Manager, Hannah. Over to you.
Only one short comment on this one, Mr. Mayor, and that's just in one point, the numbering and the formatting. My apologies. And subject to that also where it says 1.6, which of course should be 3.1, just to note that it is in fact a reference group. Thank you.
All right. Okay, are there any questions of? All right. Okay, thank you. So this is around resolution to appoint an elected member on the consent phase project reference group. The council adopts the mayor's recommendation to appoint Councillor Barrett as an elected member on the reference group for the remainder of council term or dissolution of the reference group, whichever is the earliest. I'll look to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any comments? Being none, we will vote. Okay, that's passed 15 votes for and none against. You're allowed back at the table again, Councillor Barrett. Right, going to number 9, which is our council work schedule, page 105 and 106. 106, yes. So are there any questions or comments on the work schedule?
No, I'll take it as read.
Okay. All right. I will look to move that we resolve to receive the work schedule dated December 2021, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Being no comments, questions, we will look to vote, please. It's passed 16 votes for and none against. We now go to recommendations from various committees. And the first one, let's check, is that right? We're just changing the order here. We've got our committee recommendations on Rangatane on 102. That council resolves to adopt clause 721 to Motuapo Development Plan Progress Report recommendations 3 to 4 from Rangatane on Manawatu committee meeting of the 2nd of December 2021. I'll look to move that and thank you, Councillor Dennison, one of the committee members. All right. No comments to that. I'll ask you to vote, please. That has passed 14 votes for, with 1 against and 1 abstention. Right, we will now come to the community development. Okay. All right, this is around our committee recommendations for community development. I'll ask the chair, Councillor Johnson, to speak to this.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I present the recommendations from the Public Community Development Committee of the 1st of December 2021 to be adopted.
Right, now a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Bowen. All right. Yeah. All right, are there any matters arising or comments? There is. Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move an amendment to the community reference group's terms and reference, particularly that clause 5.1 group composition in the community reference group's terms of reference be amended from, I guess I'll read it out. The Pacifica reference group will include members with a variety of backgrounds and experiences, including members from each Pacifica community in Palmerston North. Members will have connections to and experience working with Pacifica families and communities. 2, the Pacifica reference group will include skilled Pacifica members with a variety of backgrounds and experiences in different sectors. Full stop. Speak to that. And so essentially, when we were discussing this in the Community Development Committee, I felt that I didn't have enough information from the Pacifica community as to what kind of Pacifica reference group they were actually wanting. And so I've spent a couple of weeks engaging with more Pacifica members of the community. And from what I understand, the most important bit that they are wanting is that the current wording is too vague for the Pacifica community, specifically including members from each Pacifica community. To a lot of people, that implies that this reference group includes members from each Pacific island, which is not what we actually need in this space. We already have Papoea Pacifica Community Trust, which does have members from every island in Palmerston North. And so we've already got that. And from a cultural perspective, the current wording will actually create barriers to some people applying to any expressions of interest. And the reason for that is because often when you have expressions of interest that go up like this, what happens is generally the elders end up applying for these roles, or people who are high chiefs or people who are church leaders will end up applying, and no one else will be allowed to, because culturally the responsibilities sit with them. But if we open it up and amend the wording to align, we can then align better with what council is actually trying to achieve, which will then facilitate stronger relationships between council and the Pacifica community. So people who responded to expressions of interest wouldn't be representing Samoans and Tongans and Fijians. They will be representing Pacifica as a whole. And so they will be providing insight from their skills and experience in different sectors such as education and health and youth and, church leaders and elders, all at the table together. And I think that's the bit that we risk losing if we go with the original version. Council would receive a much more diverse Pacifica reference group who would then be able to connect and share the work that we're doing with the wider community. So I ask that you support this.
Okay, I've got a couple of comments on this. I'm just not sure if they're questions or comments, but I'll go through them. And so, councillor, you may need to be ready to answer anything. Whoops, we might have opened up. There's lots. Okay, I'll start with you, councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wondered if we could have a response from staff around this proposal, because I'm a bit nervous about changing the terms of reference without any staff input.
Yep, no, thank you. And I was going to ask for that. Actually, I'll get the GM. Do you wish to comment or have a staff member that does?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, if I could get Stephanie Valvin from the Community Development team to answer some.
Thanks, Steph. If you'd like to come forward.
Morena koutou. A couple of comments about the suggested amendment. And first, just acknowledging really that representation is complex. It's very difficult to get the balance right, particularly in a forum that is aiming to give voice. So the original wording was intended to try and ensure diverse representation across the group. As we know, Pacifica are not one homogenous group, rather a number of communities with a diversity of experiences and identities. And we also acknowledge the intersectionality within those communities as well. And that's what we were aiming to address with the criteria and statements at 5.2 in the selection process, where reference to a number of criteria are under the bullet points in terms of skills and experience, and also a mention of consideration of gender mix, cultural background, lived experience and age as well. In terms of the proposal, the amendment there, we view that the adding of the diversity of sectors does align with the intent of the terms of reference and what we were trying to achieve in the document. With regards to the word skilled, our view is that it might be unnecessary because of the criteria that we've got in 5.2. And there's also a risk that it's quite subjective. So when you're saying skilled, it's not really clear in that statement what that means. So it might mean different things to different people. and could potentially create a barrier to those who don't perceive themselves skilled in a professional sense. Just also on the second part, which has been deleted, the last sentence, that part in the original wording was also intentional to ensure that members had the experience and network to be able to liaise and communicate between the group and the community and vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Steph. All right, maybe just stay there in case there's some others. Right, I'll go through around the room. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see the good intentions behind these amendments by the mover and the seconder, but to me, it is showing that we are standardizing the criteria for each and every member. So it will be more complicated. I can see that we are asking for a same kind of skill set for each and every member of the group, which will complicate the process, I guess.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had originally jumped in the queue for questions, but the response from, the comments from Stephanie have clarified my questions. I'm not going to support the amendments. I'm actually comfortable with the different sectors being included to clarify what the mover is trying to achieve, but I have concerns around the word skilled and the perception that individuals may or may not take on that. In talking with a friend that I've got who's involved in Nuvaka, a Fijian group, there are different levels of interpretation of how people define themselves, particularly with a cultural overlay and taking account into what Councillor Dingwell's outlined around elders and where they fit in different cultural environments as well. And so I actually think that skilled will also come down to an interpretation of age and perhaps qualifications and those kind of things. And I think that's taking away from what we're trying to achieve. I'm really comfortable with the original terms of reference, particularly the criteria. I don't have it in front of me, the criteria that was outlined around ensuring that we had diversity in the group, particularly around age and experience, connections to communities. So I'm really comfortable that actually the vague nature, whilst again that's been interpreted differently as both a positive and a negative, in my view actually gives scope to allow a broad range of views coming into the reference group. So I'm comfortable with that. And I also wouldn't support us losing that last sentence around the members having the connection to an experience working with Pacifica families and communities, because I actually think that that's quite crucial when hearing from a reference group that actually there's that, we had this debate around the disability reference group, ensuring that actually there was good lived experience among that, alongside professionals and those kind of things. So actually I think that the original terms of reference gives scope for what the mover is trying to achieve, but also acknowledge that the different wording is providing a different perspective on clarity, but I'm not going to support the changes.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question, if I could, at this point. One was around was there any engagement with the Papaoea Pacifica Community Trust in regards to shaping these terms of reference?
Yes, yep, there was.
And were they comfortable with what you're proposing, or did they have some alternates that were suggested but weren't adopted in this recommendation?
They essentially provided the initial, the wording that's in there.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you.
Councillor Mickelard, you jumped in and out.
Yes, Mr. Chair, my questions have been answered. Thank you.
All right. Okay, that's exhausted questions. Are there any further comments? There being none, I'll give you the right to reply, Councillor, before we vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks also to staff for clarifying some of those questions there. I guess from my perspective, where I was going with this amendment was actually based on Tracy Mafilio, who was the original person who put in a submission to our long-term plan asking for such a reference group. And in her submission and in discussions with her, what she was saying is there is a lot more to Pacifica than just the just PPCT. And when we ended up engaging with PPCT, we got their perspective, but we didn't actually get the wider perspective of the wider community. And that's mostly because a lot of people understand PPCT as being the go-to for the voice of Pacifica. Whereas what she was trying to do was open it up so other people would be able to have their voices heard in this chamber. And so that was why I had spoken to her and got her approval for these changes, along with other members of the community. The reason why we deleted that last sentence was because if you are Pacifica, you are already a member of a Pacifica community. You already have connections and to an experience working with Pacifica families and communities. It is just inherent in the way that Pacifica live and how they experience their culture. No one ever stands here as an individual in terms of Pacifica. They always stand as part of a wider community. And so I guess that's why we decided to delete that sentence. So basically it was down to trying to open it up so that other people who aren't PPCT would have an opportunity to also be part of the reference group, but it doesn't necessarily mean that PPCT wouldn't be part of that table. But I think it's important that we say from the outset that the people who end up on this reference group are from a wide range of backgrounds and that kind of thing. So yes, anyway, I ask you to support it.
Thank you, councillor. All right, councillors, we will vote on the amendment and the suggested changes from councillor Dingwall. And that has failed with 6 votes for and 10 against. Right, we'll come back to you, councillor Johnson, with your original, the substantive. And that's around the accepting the
What's on the screen there isn't quite
No,
correct.
I'm just, sorry, our great minds thinking alike. What's on the paper here is different to what's on the screen. We can just get that.
But I think it's just a shortened version, so it's not written out, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. All right. So it's around clause 2421, community reference groups, terms of reference recommendations 1 and 2, which are in your papers from the Community Development Committee 1 December 2021, moved by the Chair, Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Bowen. We will vote unless there's any more matters arising. There being none, we will vote. It's passed 15 votes for and none against. All right, we might have to vote again. Sorry, we've missed somebody. That is passed with 15 votes for and 1 against. All right, we move to page number 12, which is our presentation of public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from the 8th of December. I'll ask the Chair, the Deputy Mayor, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that the Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from the 8th of December are adopted.
Thank you. And seconded by Deputy Chair, Councillor Hancock. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote. Councillor Naylor, could you just vote, please? That has passed, 16 votes for and none against. Right. We have the new committee recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee, and I will ask the Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to these, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendations for the Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from the 15th of December. I'd just like to point out I'm not moving 95.21. Hang on a moment. Hang on.
Sorry, 92.21, which is the annual report.
Sorry, the annual report, yeah, because the auditor changes hasn't come in yet. So if necessary, we'll come back and do that this afternoon and reconvene and do it. So once we get that auditor's report signed off, we can't do one without the other. And also, I would like to add an additional recommendation, which will come up on screen. And just to give you the background of this recommendation, it came from the Mayor's and Deputy Mayor's sensitive expenditure report. And that was from my Finance and Audit meeting of September the 20th, where we asked for explanations of what the spending should be. And it was outlined at that meeting. And I meant to move it my finance report last week, and with such a long agenda, I completely forgot. So all it is an administrative list of what should be in that report and what shouldn't. And I can assure you that everything that was covered last week was out of that list. So I just wanted for clarity so that when questions are raised again, like at the September report, what's in the list, we know what's in that list. So I'd like to move that as well, and I have a seconder, Councillor Naylor. So I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a all right, what we might do, because there's a number there and there's a lot of people jumping into the queue, if you could just put your hands up if we're going to do this last new recommendation first separately, and then we'll go back to the substantive recommendations. So does anybody want to speak to this? Yeah, okay, cool. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, it was a question to the chair. I'm not clear without those papers in front of me what isn't included in that reporting as a result of this resolution.
Well, basically everything that was in that report is included. There's nothing that's missing.
So I'm not clear what the point of this is.
It's just because at the meeting, people asked what was included because there seemed to be some confusion about what was in there. And so we started talking about accommodation, training costs and all that. So I just thought that it would be clear to have outlined what is in the expenditure. So if you think there is something missing, you can always, perhaps the CFO might be able to help me.
Yeah, I mean, officers would support this recommendation because it gives us a lot more clarity. The last resolution that we're working from talks about vague terms like discretionary expenditure, which doesn't mean a lot. This is much more precise from our perspective, and just allows us to have some absolute clarity about what we're reporting on.
Thank you. So can I just ask the CFO to confirm that there's nothing that would have been included in the previous report that wouldn't be included in that?
Yeah, I can confirm that.
Thank you.
The issue from an officer perspective is that the previous resolution was rather vague. This is much more precise.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Stuart. That helps me.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, it was just a question around the mayoral relief fund and the mayoral discretionary fund. In the last report, they were just reported as totals for the whole fund. So would that continue, or would there be more detailed reporting? Because other spending is broken down, and I'm not clear which spending ends up being broken down and which, and which is just a total.
I mean, I give you a rundown each year on what the discretionary. I won't give you a rundown on the relief fund because for privacy reasons, there's family names, there's individuals, but
no,
certainly.
I wasn't asking for a breakdown. It's just, I guess I'm pointing out that there's a bit of inconsistency in the reporting in that some funds are broken down and some are not. And this doesn't really assist in knowing to what level we're asking for the reporting on. So I just wondered if that was.
An answer to your question is no. That's why it's listed separately. The mayoral relief fund and the discretionary fund will be as it's reported. If you look at A and B, that's where it all applies to. And obviously, I mean, the gifts and things are separately. So no, there was no intention to break down the mayoral relief fund and the discretionary fund.
Okay, that's fine. It's not super important. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else that wishes to comment on this? Councillor Naylor.
It's just really a point of clarification. I mean, I'm comfortable with this clarity, but the A and under A, all elected member travel, I would assume that might include taxi card charges. So I guess just highlighting perhaps that's an additional reporting that doesn't exist, well, that we haven't had to date, that would potentially, I'm assuming, am I correct? Can officers clarify that would include that? I'm comfortable.
It would if the costs were paid for from the mayor's budget. So you'll be aware there's a governance budget to pay for elected members.
It says all elected member travel. Until now, taxi charges haven't been reported. Happy to include that here. It is specifically as elected members rather than mayors A and B. Yeah. So I guess that I would have thought that taxi travel was elected member travel. So I just thought I'd highlight it, perhaps because that might be a change. But I'm comfortable with the clarity that this provides.
Is there anybody else? Councillor Barrett?
Thank you, and thank you to the mover for getting this to us now. So that it's clear for me, if we go ahead with this, what, if any, elected member expenditure would be excluded from reporting?
As I said before, councillor, there's nothing excluded.
Possibly allowances, but that's all public, on public record. I.e. your phone, your
But yeah.
tablet, yeah.
But that's not included in this. This is all around the sensitive expenditure area. Remember, this is not about allowances and this is just sensitive expenditure.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that wishes to comment? Councillor Naylor.
Sorry to come back a second time, but just looking at the wording and particularly in light of the previous question, I'm wondering if it would be better to word the first line, if the mover was happy with this, to take only out so that future reporting on elected member sensitive expenditure include, because otherwise, if there were to be some additional expenditure that was appropriate to be reported, this wording would preclude that. And I think probably the clarity that this is intending, it would be better to delete only.
I'm comfortable as it is.
Okay, is there anybody else wishing to comment? All right. Okay, we're going to vote just on this one first. And that has passed 14 votes for and 2 abstentions. Right, we'll come back to the substantive recommendations. Okay. So there is, we've got them up on screen there, moved by the chair and the deputy chair. Now I've got a number of in the queue here. So Councillor Hapeta.
Can I please have 91, 21 separate, please?
Okay. So we're going to separate them. So we're separating 91-21 around the review of the rating system. Okay. Councillor Dennison.
Furthermore, could I have separation further to that of 91-21 of 2, including the 2I, 2II of that item?
Right, we just might take a couple of minutes break just to allow the staff just to catch up there. So do you just want to repeat, Councillor Dennison, what you're after?
Yes, it's the same item, the review of the rating system, 91-21, but I'd want to specifically exclude separate 2 of that, which and then that follows on with 2I and then 2II, which is the 2 points that add to that recommendation. Does that make sense? Thank you. And reserve my right to speak.
So do you want them both together, just 2 together, or them separated?
Mr. Mayor, just for clarification, that I understood Councillor Hapeta asked for the separation of 91-21 separated, but more specifically, I would like that item having 2 of those 3 recommendations taken separately of that separation. Thank you.
Okay, understand. Again, just give the team a couple of minutes to. Yep. Okay, so we'll do what's up on the screen, which is clause 95-21, which is the updated 2022 Business Assurance Audit Plan, recommendations 1 and 2. And all of these clauses, 86-21 around the airport, and the rating valuations and the rating valuations impact. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So we'll be doing everything bar clause 91-21, which has been going around the rating review, which is being separated. All right. Okay, if we can get that up on screen, and we can vote now, please. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. Okay, so this is the second one where the council resolves to adopt clause 91. Yeah, 91-21 review of the rating system recommendations 1 and 3. And I'll just go through them because just so people know, it recommends that 1, the chief executive continually review aspects of the rating system and in particular investigate options for introducing new targeted rates for the 23-24 year and also for a revised trigger mechanism for determining the interface between rural and urban rating. And number 3, that the Chief Executive report to Council on options, including approaches to rating system implementation to encourage utilisation of vacant buildings and brownfield land within the city. Okay, so we're going to vote on those 2. Thank you. And that has passed 15 votes for and 1 against. All right, this is around Council resolves to adopt clause 91-21, review of the rating system recommendation 2. And 2 is that the Council determines that in principle it believes a rating system with a general rate based on the capital value is more appropriate, and that the Chief Executive be instructed to develop options incorporating a capital value based rate, and in reporting back, 1, demonstrate how implementation might be transitioned over a period of up to 3 years, beginning in 2023-24, and 2, outline a proposed public engagement process. Right. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to raise, only briefly, because I think we covered it fairly well just only last week, but just really wanted to highlight 3 main issues really. One is that I didn't believe that this was a hot topic that needs to be before this council, and still hold firm on that position. The other one that I highlight, that it was a fairly strongly split view even at that early stage. This is political. The headline and the commentary around stirring up a hornet's nest unnecessarily, I still hold true to that. It's starting to murmur already through comments to me, and 1 brief email, which is was supportive, or at least questioning more information on the realisation that they could be increasing their rate burden with the possible move, and that I see no need to change. I think land values have served us well, and that all we're doing is redistributing the rates unnecessarily in this volatile market where property values have changed significantly, not only in this last year, but in the last 2. And until that slows down and eases to know where we're at, I don't see a need to change, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Other comments? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I didn't really think we needed to re-debate this 5 days later, but anyhow, here we go. First of all, to address the points that Councillor Dennison has raised, that this is not a hot topic. There's 2 points that I want to make on that. One is that if we waited for things to be a hot topic, we would be a purely reactive council instead of a proactive one. And I think it's better that we determine what needs to be done and do it, rather than we just constantly react to hot topic issues. Secondly, as those of you with longer memories will recall, a review of the rating system was something that I stood for council on. It was one of my primary platforms in 2016, and I was elected on that basis. And I repeated my desire for a review of the rating system at the next election. I was elected again on that basis. So clearly there are people in the city who do want a review of the rating system. Whether or not they have a specific outcome in mind, that is definitely something that I have been transparent about from the start. The comment that it was a split vote and it's political, of course it's political. This is a political environment. Everything we do in here is political. And I would hazard to say that some of the comments that Councillor Dennison makes are political in nature as well. It is political. And a split vote has never stopped us from doing anything in the past. In fact, if it's something that goes through by 1 vote, then that's a majority vote. Thirdly, that there's no need to change. I think the case was made very well the other day, not specifically by me, but by other members in the chamber who brought up very good reasons why there is a need to consider change. And fourthly, the red herring of property values is being brought up again. Since Councillor Dennison brought this up the other day in the chamber, a number of people have had concerns that because their house value has gone up, that as a consequence, they will be paying more rates under the capital value system. Now, I don't know if it's a lack of understanding or a misrepresentation, but we all know that the valuations going up do not automatically lead to an increased rate. What it does is it may cause a redistribution of the rate. And so if my house property has gone up from 400,000 to 500,000, that doesn't mean that my rates are going up 25%. And yet by bringing this into the discussion constantly, it's causing, it's unsettling people. And I believe that Councillor Dennison, given the time he's been on council, understands that very well, that just because a valuation has gone up, it does not mean that your rates go up. In fact, it may well be, if your house goes up 25% and someone else goes up 50%, that actually you get a decrease. So raising constantly this problem of property values increasing in value is not relevant to the review of the rating system. And in fact, the officer did his level best to keep these two topics completely separated in the meeting. So I think we need to factor that in. Thank you.
Any others wishing to comment? No, I'll just comment that I didn't agree with what's happened, but it is a democracy and it went through. But I do think we are going to hear from our public, absolutely. I have been contacted since the article, and I think you'll find there'll be an awakening. Anyway, we'll vote. Thank you. That is passed, 12 votes for and 3 against. All right, I'll go back to Councillor Beattie because we have just been given some news which allows us to move the remainder of your recommendations. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we've now had notification that the Audit Office have signed off the annual plan. So I'd now like to move item recommendation 9221, adoption of the annual plan report 2020 to 21.
Thank you. That's seconded by the Deputy Chair, Councillor Naylor. All right. Anybody wish to comment on this? No? Right. Oh, no, there is. Sorry, there is. Deputy Mayor.
Just a question for you, Mr. Mayor. Probably a question for someone else around process. The minor edits that have been circulated, do we need to ensure that one of the recommendations makes specific reference to those, or are those included in the recommendation 3, which is a little bit more?
There's already delegated authority to make minor amendments.
Okay, so we'd just take the edits that had been circulated as advance notice of minor edits.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a catch-all, number 3. Okay, any others? Councillor Naylor.
No, it was just the same clarity I was going to ask for.
All right. With that confirmed, no other comments, we will vote. Okay, that's passed 15 votes for and none against. Right, we'll move now to okay. All right, councillors, we are going now to exclude the public and move into part 2. We'll have a lunch break in the middle there, but it just gives everybody an understanding where the meeting's at. So it's around resolving the council resolves that the public be excluded, including the matters on the screen there. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for administration, item 13 is exclusion of public, and finance report was 13, so you might want to just make that 13A.
Thank you. Yep, admin will sort that out. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to advise members that I'll be voting against, and the reason for that is that my view, especially around item 17, is that it brings in matters that could and in fact should be considered in part 1 and mixes those with matters in part 2.
Councillor Naylor.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question and then also a comment. There was a additional notice of motion flagged via email that's not on this list and hasn't been included with it, late items, and hasn't been provided from governance. And I'm wondering if the intention is for that to be included in part 2 meeting today.
It's on the screen, Councillor.
Okay, sorry, I was looking at my papers. Further to that, I do also want to indicate a level of discomfort with the level of decisions that, the number and level of decisions that are being made in part 2, and the reasons for that. I think along similar lines to Councillor Barrett, I think when we're getting numerous requests, particularly around increases in budget, I think those conversations need to happen in part 1. If there are commercial or third-party issues, I think those issues need to be taken separately, but I'm becoming more and more uncomfortable with the nature and the extent of the decisions that are being pushed to part 2 in a way that I believe does not give our community the opportunity for open and to view the open in an open and transparent way. The decisions are made on their behalf about the money that is being spent. And so I'll also be opposing that.
All right, councillors, any others wanting to comment? We will vote. That is passed 11 votes for, 3 against and 1 abstention. All right, we will be back in the chamber at 1:20. Thank you.